Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, we're going to go ahead and get started here with the panel. My name is Laura Krantz. I'm the higher education reporter at the Boston Globe. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much everyone who's hosting and who's put together our lovely presentation up here. We have three panelists for you today. Bob Collins is the Vice President of Financial Aid at Western Governors University. Eric Newnham is Assistant Director for Student Loans at Stonehill College. And Eileen Donahue is the State Senator of Massachusetts. So thank you all for being here. Each of the panelists are going to speak first, and then we're going to open it up to questions, and I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to ask anything they want of the three up here. So Bob, do you want to go ahead and start us off?
Great, thank you very much. Our bios you'll find our bios in the application, and only to say I've been a practicing financial aid administrator for over 3 decades. It's a long time. Got lots of experience in the financial aid in the higher education community. Very fortunate to have served in higher ed for my entire career. And one of the things I know is that we don't need any more amplifiers of problems. What we need are communicators of solutions. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here at this national summit to share some of what we have done at Western Governors University with respect to responsible borrowing initiatives. Initiatives, it's plural. It's more than one thing, right? That's what I'd like to share with you today. Scott Pulsifer, our president, was here earlier, shared with you some of our academic delivery model as well as our business model. So let me refresh you if you weren't here to hear that. WGU has over 70,000 students enrolled, and over 70,000 students have graduated from Western Governors University. It was created almost 20 years ago by the 19 Western Governors. And it's their concern, the Western Governors, their concern was about the rising cost of education and whether or not students know anything when they graduate. So what are the headlines today? The rising cost of education and whether or not students know anything. So we've been making some progress in that regard. And so the mission is to provide an education, quality education, independent of time or place. So our model, our academic delivery model, is exclusively online. Students from all 50 states, and they're working adults, essentially. They have part of that 30 million Americans that have some college and no degree, and many of them have student loan debt. They have prior debt. So whatever happened, life happened, and so their career or their college experience was interrupted. So that's who we serve as our students. The average age is 35 years old, and our students are trying to balance their work and their life and their family, and fitting school into all of that. So here's our financial aid delivery model. We have monthly starts, the first day of every month. The academic year, which is our financial aid delivery model, is 12 months long, and that consists of 2 6-month payment periods. Those would be non-standard terms. So we have 12 points of entry, monthly cycles. Every first day of the month, there's new students starting and there's students graduating, because it's a continuous enrollment year-round. The tuition and fees are a fixed price. It's a subscription model, and those do include the learning resources for about $3,000 per term, and it's a fixed price for all you can learn, right? So that's our competency-based education model. And we obviously have been able to demonstrate some sustainability. We have not had a tuition increase since 2008. So that's a pretty good proof of concept, if you will. So if you look at the structure of this competency-based education model, where learning is held constant and time is variable, at a subscription price, at a fixed price for all you can learn, it really gives the student the opportunity to accelerate their time to degree completion. There's some incentive to stay heads down, stay focused, and see how many competency units they can acquire during that 6-month period. So it really gives some incentive for students to to maybe take that opportunity to get 15 components, 18, 24, however many they can accomplish in that 6-month period. So there's some incentive for students to do that. And our students do. Again, some college, no degree, so we do accept many transfer credits, but the average time to degree completion for the undergraduate is 2.5 years. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our responsible borrowing initiatives. The first one, the first two, if you will, on this page, are the Department of Ed experimental sites. The department has about 10 or so experiments, and these experimental sites grant waivers of regulations. So an institution will apply to participate in an experiment. They have the opportunity to waive certain regulations, and it is an experiment where you have to have a target population and a control group, and you have to be able to demonstrate what are the advantages and disadvantages of this waiver of this regulation. In other words, it might influence public policy. It helps elected officials maybe revisit the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act and lessons learned, if you will. So the experimental sites are very important to us. And the two that I want to speak to today is with respect to the student loans. The first one is unequal loan disbursements. For those of you in the aid office, you know that we have to make at least 2 equal loan disbursements. Well, in this experiment, they were allowing schools to have unequal loan disbursements, where the split could be no more than 75-25 split. So you could have a one disbursement at 75% of that scheduled award, and the second disbursement would be 25%, 75-25. So it was a great idea. It was Western Governors University implemented this experiment in July of 2014, but unfortunately, the Department of Education had to sunset that experiment in June of 2016, so we were only in it for 2 years. The reason they sunset that experiment, there was only 10 schools that were participating in that experiment. And I'm wondering, 35 years, where are my friends and colleagues? Pick me up here, guys. This is really a good thing. The idea behind unequal disbursements, we want students to borrow only what they need. We have certain situations, for example, in our nursing college, where there's a science fee at the beginning of the program, $300 science fee. It's a one-time fee. We want to be able to let the student borrow what they need, pay for that, have an unequal disbursement, so that the science fee can be paid at the first term, but it's not a recurring fee in the second term. So they can borrow direct costs only, pay their fees, and they don't have to borrow additional amounts to cover that fee at the beginning of the program. Same thing at the end of the program. Teachers College has a demonstration teaching fee, $900. So we have the opportunity to make that unequal loan disbursement for the students in a teaching program when it's the end of their program. These are students that are about to graduate and go into the classroom. So we have to not allow that, if you will. But in that 2-year period, we had over 12,000 loans where we had unequal disbursements. And the evidence is clear. It was mostly utilized by the teachers and the nurses, those colleges. And that's just in a 2-year period. So while I appealed to my friends inside the Beltway, and I said, please, there's only 10 schools in this experiment, but I've got 12,000 students that are benefiting from this experiment. No, we got to make room for these other experiments, and there's just not enough schools participating. Got a sunset. So I thought, okay, I'm going to continue the experiment. I got 12,000 students who were in that experiment for a 2-year period. What's going to happen this year when I don't have unequal disbursements? Will they borrow more money, right? So that's the whole idea between a target and a control group. So while the department has sunset this experiment, I'm continuing to monitor these students to see what is the impact, So it kind of helps make the science experiment a little more fun, right? So just one more point as a side note that, we have 6-month terms, and multiple disbursements are required in a payment period if the payment period is greater than 4.5 months. And maybe I stand corrected, but I can't find anything in the statute or the regulation that says you have to have multiple disbursements if your term is greater than 4.5 months. That's your traditional semester, right? 4.5 months. So anyhow, there's Federal Student Aid Handbook guidance. It's sub-regulatory guidance. We adhere to that. And I was appealing to, maybe we can change this rule. Let them borrow their money to pay their direct costs when the charges are incurred, right? I mean, so that's one of the benefits of that. And single-term loans is what we call them. At WGU, it would be at the end of the program, right? These are students that are about to graduate, and they don't have but a few credits to complete. So anyhow, that's one waiver that we've been able to experiment, and we're going to continue to experiment, even though it's sunset. The other one is limiting unsubsidized direct loans. This one is ongoing. We implemented this one in January of 2013. This does have regulatory waivers. It's ongoing. And essentially what we have the ability is to restrict borrowing to direct costs only, okay? Now, when you enter into these experiments, the school gets to choose the criteria for which they want to use. It has to be empirical evidence. You have to have some data-driven decisions in how are you going to limit the borrowing of students in your campus and your population. So it really is personal to the school, understanding your student demographics. So what we did at Western Governors University is we looked at some empirical data. We looked at what are the students, who are the, 99% of our students come in with prior college, some transfer credits. So what is the success rate of those students who transfer? Well, conversely, what is the failure rate of those students? Who's dropping out of WGU? And so what we discovered is that students that come to us with a high outstanding principal balance from prior college is less likely to graduate than others. So we drew a bright line. And we said, all right, for undergraduate students, if they have over $30,000 in OPB, we use acronyms a lot, $30,000 in outstanding principal balance from prior college, we're going to limit them to $6,500. That's per academic year. It's just slightly more than the direct cost, right? Tuition and fees of about $6,000. So we give them, just $6,500, and there's no opting out of this. If you have prior debt as an undergraduate of $30,000 or more, you are limited to these direct costs only, and that's by our participation in these experiments and we got the back from the federal government. They got our back, because students, they will call, they will complain, and they got our back. So appreciate that from the department. Graduate students, on the other hand, we discovered that $40,000 is the bright line for them to have less likelihood to graduate. So 40,000 of OPB, and we limit them to $7,500 for the academic year. So that's about what the direct cost would be for the graduate program. So since July of 2013, we've had over 10,000 students in the target group. 40% of them are graduate students. 60% are undergrads. So roughly 6,000 students, undergrads, are limited to direct costs only. 4,000 graduate students are limited to direct costs only. Of that population, 600 students, 6%, have already met their aggregate limits. They maxed out before they got finished. In fact, if you take a look at the average, the little parenthetical underneath the undergrad students, so while we target this population of students where the bright line is $30,000, the average OPB for those students in the target group is $43,000. Now, annual or aggregate limits for undergrad is what, 57.5, somewhere around there, 58. So these students are already coming in with a significant amount of debt. And the graduate students, they're coming in with an outstanding principal balance of $62,000. So, well, let's leave the graduate students aside, because their aggregate limits, their ceiling is much higher. But what the intent here is for the undergraduate students to have the ability to borrow to complete their degree before you run out of federal funds. If you borrow the maximum amount you can borrow every year, you're not going to finish your degree before you hit the ceiling. So that's one of the things that we took advantage of. Those are two of the waivers of regulations. So that's important. And so here's another thing that did not require any waiver of regulation. No special dispensation or agreement with the U.S. Department of Education. This one was a simple process change. And this is where we took an approach to the award letter. We've heard so much about that in the last day, about presenting to students more transparency and giving them information to make good decisions. And so what we did is this simple process change really had a significant reduction on debt, on student loans. Back in 2013, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau had introduced a shopping sheet, as you recall. And while it was bandied about as being a required award letter, all schools in the nation must follow this same model in this standard form, There was some pushback from the community, and it never was required. It was never mandated by the department or by statute to make that the standard form. But I liked the concept. It was pretty cool. It's one page, plain language, but I modified it to make it a little more user-friendly, put it into a Q&A format. But I used a lot of the same language that the shopping sheet had, the federal shopping sheet had. And the concept was to help students make an informed decision and borrow wisely, right? That's the mantra. So what we did is we took the shopping sheet, the modified version of it, we personalized it to the student's program of study, whether they're in nursing or teaching and associated tuition costs by grade level. We'd present to the student, what does it cost to go to WGU? We differentiate between direct costs, tuition and fees, and indirect costs, meals and housing, live, eat, breathe, go to school. So direct costs and indirect costs. Plain language, what does it cost to go to WGU in that 12-month period? And we present to the student then the gift aid, what they're eligible for, and it's the grants, scholarships that they're eligible for. And then we present to the student, how much should I borrow? So it's a question. And we recognize their annual limits. It's got smart logic in this presentation. So we recognize their limits, but we present it to the student. We make a recommendation to students to borrow only their unmet direct costs. Seems like a mouthful, but it's tuition and fees, minus your gift aid. Here's what we recommend you borrow. I also tell them what they're eligible to borrow. You know, there's a presentation of what the annual limit is that they could borrow, but here's what we recommend. And in that 3-year period, it's been a significant change in student behavior. 65% of our students borrow less. 65% of our students take our recommendation. Fascinating. Another 10% just decline all loans entirely, altogether, because they looked at the way it's presented. What does it cost to go to school? How can I pay for it? And they realized, well, you know, this is pretty affordable. I guess I can, you know, afford this through my through a monthly payment plan or through my tuition reimbursement from my employer. Now, there are another 25% that do request more, and that's fine. I'm not going to stand in the way of any eligible student, otherwise eligible student. If they want to borrow more, they can up to their eligible amounts. So that's been a fascinating, simple process change. That was the change in behavior, the significant behavior change. If you do the math over the 3 years, from July of 13 to June of 2016, the average borrowing per student went from $78.70 per year to $46.40 per year. That's a 41% decrease on an annual basis. So that was really good. We continue to evolve. We learn from this this project and kind of tinker around the edges, make it better. So here's the next iteration that we're working on. And we hope to have the loan scenario calculator in production is early calendar year 2017. So early in the next couple of months, we'll have a loan scenario calculator. So what's this going to do? It's going to have full visibility to the student's total loan debt, right? So their debt from prior colleges. All schools receive that based on the FAFSA output. The ISA record has prior college. So I'm going to be able to grab the outstanding principal balance from prior college, and I'm going to present what is loans obtained at WGU, and I'm going to present that to the student, saying, here's your current total loan balance, here's your estimated monthly payment after you graduate. And you can project your time to degree completion, how many more terms do I have to complete. The tuition is going to be fixed at this amount. So if you have outstanding principal balance of $10,000 and you've already borrowed $5,000, and you've got 3 more terms, how much do you want to borrow? It's a game. It's interactive technology that allows the student to look at their personal situation and project how much more that they need to borrow. You know what? If I really go heads down and focus and get more done, maybe I can finish in 2 terms instead of 3. I only got to take, you know, a couple more courses and pass those assessments within that period of time, but I can save $3,000 if I do that. And what the monthly payment will be, you know, maybe I can come out of pocket some more money, and then what would my monthly payment be? So you're going to be able to turn a dial, pull the levers, right? The student's going to be able to decide, they're going to know what their monthly payment is when they graduate. And so that's really the informative part of it. And the idea of doing it at that point in time is that's when you have to make that decision, right? You got to make that decision at the time of the action, right? So it's when you're requesting a loan amount, how much do you want to borrow? And the idea is that an informed student will make a good decision, because when you're already graduated and you realize how much debt you have, income-driven repayment is a safety net, but it's too late. You've already borrowed the money. And now you're deciding which of the 8 income repayment plans you're going to choose from, right? And so at that point, that's why we're going to make it at the point, that action point, when they're making a decision. The other thing that we're going to do, we talked about this earlier in the summit, is we know when we're presenting a student an unsubsidized loan. An unsubsidized loan automatically goes into a deferment status, so meaning the student doesn't have to pay the interest, or principal or interest, while they're enrolled. And so that interest you can capitalize the interest while you're enrolled on unsub loans. These are all graduate students, by the way, unsubsidized loans. So while the interest is accruing, the next month that the interest accrues, they're paying interest on interest. And then the third month, more interest on more interest. So the loan debt, the principal balance, is increasing before you go into repayment. So we're going to encourage all of our graduate students, anybody we offer an unsubsidized loan, we're going to encourage them to pay them at least pay the interest while you're enrolled. Don't accrue it, don't capitalize it. The majority of funds and loans that are dispersed are unsubsidized loans. So we're going to help all of our students make that good decision. Okay. Key metrics, WGU. Average borrower indebtedness, the last fiscal year, award year, was under $17,000. That is the undergraduates graduating between July 1 and June 30th. Average borrower indebtedness is for loans at Western Governors University, is just under $17,000. You can see the trend line. AY13 was $21,000, 14 nearly $20,000, 15 about $19,000. So the needle is pointing down. That's a good direction. The loan repayment rate is another measure for schools. If you look at the parenthetical, what is the loan repayment rate? It's a reduction of principal balance within 3 years. And you say, well, it seems like it's very silly. I mean, 3 years if you can't reduce the principal balance. But we had talked about that, right? The capitalized interest on the unsubsidized loans, it's going to take you a while before you start eating away at the principal, because your repayments are going all towards the interest. And so that's one of the areas. We had talked about the income-driven repayment plans, where your income and your student debt, such disparity could put you in a negative amortization, right? Where your monthly payment is not even enough to reduce your principal balance. It's barely paying the interest, so it's negatively amortized. That's what the repayment rate. It's a little more nuanced than default rates, because it gives the student, it gives the perspective of the students from that university what their student debt is, the manageability of that student debt. Not just whether or not your students stay out at default, but is the debt manageable for that university? So you can see our WGU's repayment rate is 79% versus the national average of 68%. Cohort default rate trending down. 4.8% is the most recent cohort default rate, and that rate is lower than, less than half the national average and lower than every other four-year private segment. And just a couple of notes. There's a couple of URL links here that the technology didn't quite work right for us to click through those to see that 2-minute video. But this is in your in my profile on application for in my biography. You can click on those links. We've got a responsible borrowing initiative, and we're trying to share this with all of my schools, all the schools and colleagues, anybody that can implement and take some good ideas, and you can see the positive trends that we've been going. And in fact, our work is not being unnoticed. We're being recognized last summer by the American Association of University Administrators, awarded Western Governors University an exemplary model. And just recently at the Western Nowitzki Cooperative Education Technology Conference, we got the Outstanding Work Award. So it's the WOW Award. And that's what the 2-minute video is that we created. So I'll appreciate the time and the opportunity to visit with you today. I think we'll turn it back.
Yeah, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Noonan. I'm with Stonehill College. Please forgive me. I'm not going to be turning my back on you, but I'm doing a presentation for Eileen O'Leary today, so I'm not quite as familiar with her slides. Stonehill College, I think in quite stark contrast to WGU, is a traditional four-year private school here just south of Boston. We're probably a medium-sized school by most standards, somewhere around 2,400 to 2,450 students full-time. Those students are residential students, so we probably have about a 90 to 92% residential student body. Also, we've heard a lot about, I think, older learners or learners over, 30, 25. Ours are the typical 18 to 21, 22-year range. You can see here our build costs for this academic year, 2016-2017. Totals $55,130. That's tuition and room and board. Of course, books and other college expenses not included. We don't have any other fees, though. All of our fees are included in tuition. Approximately 99% of our class from this current year, 2020, receive financial aid. That includes scholarships, grants, and loans. We do include federal student loans on their award letter. We also include a shopping sheet with all of our award letters. 95% of those students are receiving free money, however. So some sort of institutional gift aid. Here we are looking at, we're looking at the last three-year cohort default rate. You can see that Stonehill College is about 0.8%. It's awesome. It's probably based on about 98% of our student borrowers in good standing. And I don't think that, I think at one point we had concerns, I think schools in general were looking at that move from 2-year to 3-year cohort. But we really didn't see a significant jump there in our rate. This just kind of exemplifies that what our median federal debt is. It's around $27,000. And that would make sense if students were dependent students borrowing their federal maximums for 4 years would net about $27,000. We can also see here the latest average debt on graduation, including both federal and private loans, just somewhere in the neighborhood of $36,000. And I think I heard somewhere today somebody said the national average was about 37 and change. Again, just to highlight the national average, 3-year cohort rates at private schools, just about 7%. And for all schools, private and public, somewhere around 11.5% national averages. So I would just want to quickly go over some of our methods or hopefully ways that we've been helping borrowers stay out of that default delinquency rate. Some of the measures we have been utilizing to encourage responsible borrowing is to limit the auto packaging of extra unsub loans. Typically schools may offer the full subsidized and unsubsidized loan, total of $5,500 in a student's first year, right? So for many of our students, what they get packaged with is just the $3,500. they're entitled to the full 55, so if they come back to us and say, well, my brother at another school got 55, we have to give them the 55. But we have shown that it actually helps students make wiser choices. They're not always coming back and asking for that extra 2,000. Additionally, we use the federal loans and a low-cost state loan here in Massachusetts, particularly to ensure that students are only borrowing those set loan limits each year. And those loans typically provide students with either zero or no interest, or in the federal case, many opportunities to have some loan forgiveness. So I think we have heard throughout the day people mentioning public service loan forgiveness or teacher loan forgiveness that the federal loans offer. Also, just as a point of interest, we do not auto-package Parent Plus loans and never have. It's not something we encourage schools to do. We think that how students and parents decide to pay for their cost of education, especially with the advent of so many, I think, competing loans on the market, make it a wiser choice for them to go out and research their opportunities. Additionally, in terms of helping students reduce their borrowing, we have a full-time staff member that happens to be me. I am at the school to provide one-on-one loan counseling to help